My name is Han Soo-ah, and for as long as I can remember, people decided who I was before I ever opened my mouth. They looked at my size first, and once they had done that, they stopped looking any further. Not at my hands, which had been shaping dough since I was barely old enough to reach the counter. Not at my heart, which somehow never learned how to stop caring about people who did not deserve it. That evening, I was closing up Hana Bakery in the rain, humming an old song under my breath, wiping down the same counter I had wiped 1,000 times before. I had absolutely no idea that my entire life was about to turn on one wet street corner. Earlier that same day, a woman in an expensive coat had announced, loudly enough for the whole shop to hear, that a girl my size should not be the one touching the pastries. I smiled, wrapped her order with extra care, and said nothing at all. I had learned a long time ago that answering cruelty out loud only feeds it. A few streets away, a very different kind of storm was building. Kang Tae-min, the youngest chief executive his family's company had ever had, was packing beside his car, shouting into his phone about a hostile takeover that could cost thousands of people their jobs. He did not see the delivery truck sliding through the rain-slick intersection ahead of him. That night, he did not notice much of anything outside his own war. I stepped out from under the bakery awning just as his car door swung open. I saw the truck a full second before he did. There was no time to shout a warning loud enough to reach him over the rain. There was only time to move. I grabbed the sleeve of his coat and pulled with everything my body had left in it. He stumbled clear. I was not so lucky. The last thing I remembered before everything went dark was the sound of my own name, shouted by a stranger somewhere close by. For one blurred second on that wet street, my eyes opened, and the first thing I saw was his face. Not disgust, not pity, just fear and something else underneath it that I did not have a name for yet. Even flat on my back on a stretcher, I heard someone in the gathered crowd mutter that at least I had enough padding on me to survive a hit like that. I wanted to laugh and cry at the very same moment. If you are watching this tonight from your own corner of the world, go ahead and hit subscribe before you keep going, because this story is about to grow into something so much bigger than one rainy street, and I promise you will not want to miss where it ends up. He came to see me that same night, still wearing his ruined suit, holding a paper bag of fruit like a man who genuinely did not know what else to bring someone who had just saved his life. "Thank you does not begin to cover this," he told me. I said it did not need to cover anything at all. I would have done the same thing for a complete stranger. He tried to press an envelope of cash into my hand, thick enough to cover a year of rent. I slid it back across the hospital blanket. "I did not save you to get paid," I told him. "I saved you because that is simply what a person does when they see someone about to be hit by a truck." He admitted later that no one had ever refused something from him before. Not once in his entire life. He told me he stood in that hospital hallway a long time that night, trying to understand a girl who wanted absolutely nothing from a man who could buy almost anything he pointed at. My grandmother raised me after my parents passed away when I was still young. She never once told me to make myself smaller in order to be loved. She told me to be kind, to work hard, and to let my worth speak for itself, even in a world too distracted by my body to actually listen. While I recovered, his mother, Seo Hiran, was already busy planning his future without him. A merger was on the table, and apparently so was a wife. Her name was Yoo Jae-yoon, daughter of the family's most important business partner. Jae-yoon shook his hand a beat too long at a company event and called their coming engagement wonderful news before he had agreed to a single thing. A week later, I was back behind the counter, because bills do not pause politely for a truck accident. My best friend Myre kept glancing toward the door like she was expecting someone in particular. "Stop that," I told her. "He is not coming back." The little bell over the door rang anyway. There he stood, out of his armor of tailored suits for once, looking like an ordinary man who genuinely did not know what to say. "I will have whatever you recommend," he said quietly, so I gave him my favorite. He came back the very next day, and the day after that. He never once mentioned who his family was. For those first few weeks, to me, he was simply Tae-min, a tired man who liked his coffee black and always left the largest tip in the jar. One night the rain fell so hard the buses stopped running entirely. Instead of leaving, he rolled up his sleeves and helped me close the shop. I did not know chief executives knew how to mop a floor, I teased him. Turns out I did not know a lot of things about being useful, he answered quietly. My grandmother fell one morning while reaching for a high shelf. The doctors said she would recover, but the bill for her care came to more than I earned in months. I did not tell a soul. I did not want anyone's pity, least of all his. When I finally went to arrange a payment plan, the woman at the desk told me the balance had already been cleared in full. Anonymous donor, she said simply. I only knew one person reckless enough with his own money to do something like that without asking me first. I told you I did not want your money, I said, my voice shaking far more than I wanted it to. He looked at me steadily. That was never for you, he said gently. That was for the only person who taught you how to be the kind of woman who runs toward danger instead of away from it. He told me that night that he had never once chosen a single thing in his own life. Not his university, not his career, not even most of his friendships. Everything had always been arranged for him by someone else. You are the first thing I ever chose for myself, he admitted, and I honestly did not know what to do with how that made me feel. I told him, in return, about years of being told I was too much to be loved, and somehow also not enough to be taken seriously at the same time. He listened like every word actually mattered, which almost no one before him had ever bothered to do. The company's annual charity gala arrived 2 weeks later. His mother had already listed Jae-yoon as his companion on the official program without asking him a single thing about it. Come with me, he said one evening, so quickly I nearly missed it. Not because you have to. Because for once I want the one honest person in my life standing beside me in that room. Myrae found me a dress the color of a forest at dawn. Cut to fit every curve I had spent years trying to hide from strangers. You do not need to shrink for this dress, she told me firmly. This dress was made to fit you exactly as you already are. I felt every eye in that ballroom land on me the moment I walked through the doors. For the first time in my whole life, I did not shrink under the weight of it. I walked in like I belonged there, because that night, I finally decided that I did. Who is she? Someone whispered, just loud enough for me to catch it. Someone's assistant, probably. I smiled and let them keep wondering. I had spent my entire life being underestimated. By now, I was rather good at it. Jae-yoon found me near the dessert table, her smile sharp as cut glass. Enjoy tonight, she said sweetly. It will not last long. I did not yet understand exactly how much effort she was already planning to put into making sure of that. His mother pulled him aside on a private balcony while I waited quietly near the doors. I could not make out every word, but I saw her point back toward the ballroom, toward me. This ends tonight, she told him plainly. He crossed the entire ballroom floor in front of every person who mattered to his family's name, and he asked me to dance. I do not really know how to do this properly, I whispered as the music began. Neither do I, he said. Let us figure it out together. For a few minutes, nothing else in that enormous room existed. Not his mother's glare from the balcony. Not Jae-yoon's calculating eyes from across the floor. Just the two of us, and a quiet, almost ridiculous hope that maybe I had finally found somewhere I truly belonged. While I floated home that night on the memory of one dance, Jae-yoon was already making phone calls of her own. She had never once in her life learned how to lose anything gracefully. She showed up at my bakery a few days later, dressed like she was slumming it just by walking through the door. There is more than enough here for you to open a shop somewhere far away from Seoul, she said, sliding an envelope across the counter toward me. All you have to do is disappear quietly. I pushed it right back to her. I am not for sale, I told her calmly. She smiled thinly and promised me I would come to regret that particular answer. Within a single day, gossip sites were calling me a gold digger who had staged the entire accident just to get close to him. I had never once, in any version of that night, staged anything at all. Someone had simply rewritten my own story to hurt me. Regular customers stopped coming through the door. A few only came to stare and whisper behind their hands. Myrae tried to stay positive, but even she could see our income dropping with every passing day. "See what your choice has already cost this family's name," his mother said, sliding a tabloid printout across a low tea table between us. "Marry Jae-yoon, and this entire scandal disappears by morning." He called a press conference the very next day. "The woman in these photographs saved my life," he told the room calmly, without flinching once in front of every camera present. "Any story claiming otherwise is a lie, and I intend to pursue legal action against whoever keeps spreading it." 2 days after that, officers arrived at the bakery asking about missing funds tied to an account I had genuinely never even seen. Someone had built an extremely careful trap, and I had walked straight into the middle of it without a single warning. They did not arrest me, but they held me for questioning most of that entire afternoon. Honesty, as it turned out, was not always enough to make people believe you. He arrived before I was even released, demanding to speak with whoever was in charge. I had never once seen calm, composed Kang Tae-min raise his voice before that particular day. They cleared me of any wrongdoing that same night. But an accusation, once it has already been printed, does not fully disappear simply because it turns out to be false. Some part of it lingers, like a stain that never quite washes all the way out. My grandmother had never once told me to give up on anything in my entire life. That night, for the very first time, she asked me softly whether his world was truly worth what it was already costing me. His mother invited me to a family dinner, and within minutes I understood it was never really an invitation at all. It was a test built specifically for me to fail. She corrected the way I held my chopsticks in front of 6 relatives before the soup had even arrived. "Enough," Tae-min said, quiet but absolutely final, rising from his seat at that table. She saved my life on a rainy street while the rest of us were too busy protecting our own reputations to notice. If anyone here cannot show her respect, they are welcome to leave my presence instead of her. We are getting close to the middle of this story now, and I want to know something from you. Tell me in the comments exactly where you are watching this from tonight, and if you have not already, go ahead and subscribe, because what happens next changes everything I thought I understood about love and trust. When public humiliation failed to break me, Jae-yoon tried something far crueler. A photograph appeared online showing me in what looked like an intimate meeting with a stranger, time-stamped for the exact week Tae-min and I had grown closest. He did not call me at all that night. He sat alone in his office staring at a picture that was never what it seemed, and for the first time since we had met, he let himself believe the worst version of me. "Explain this," he said the next morning, sliding the printed photo across my own bakery counter like it was evidence laid out in a trial. I looked down at a moment that had never actually happened, and something inside my chest quietly cracked. "If you have to ask me that," I said, "then you never really trusted me at all." We stood apart in that small bakery, and the distance between us suddenly felt far larger than the tiny room we were standing in together. That same night, I packed a small bag and left a folded note on the kitchen table. I was not running away from him. I was running away from a version of myself that kept shrinking to fit into rooms that were never actually built for someone like me in the first place. I went to my grandmother's hometown, a quiet countryside village of rolling green hills and warm wooden porches, and I opened a tiny bakery of my own out of an old storefront. For the first time in a long while, no one there knew my name, my scandal, or the size of dress I wore. They only knew the bread I baked for them. Tae-min did not simply move on the way his mother had hoped he would. He hired investigators of his own, quietly, without telling anyone in his family. He traced the doctored photograph back to the very same editor Jae-yoon had used, and back further still to a paid witness who had lied to the police about the missing funds. Piece by piece, the trap that had been built around me began unraveling in his hands. He proved himself to me during those quiet months not through grand gestures, but through simple consistency. Every single week, an unsigned box of pastries from a bakery near his office arrived at my grandmother's door, a quiet way of saying he had not forgotten either one of us, even from so far away. He eventually called an emergency meeting of the family and the board, the very same room where his mother had once told him "this ends tonight." This time, he stood at the head of that table himself. He laid out every single piece of evidence, the doctored photograph, the fabricated financial trail, and the paid witness who finally admitted the whole truth under pressure. Jae-yoon's carefully built world came apart in front of the very people whose opinions she had spent her entire life trying to protect. His mother sat silently through all of it. When it was finally over, she did not defend Jae-yoon. She simply asked one quiet question: where is the girl now? He drove out to the countryside himself. No driver, no suit, just a simple coat and a car full of questions he had been carrying for weeks. I saw him standing outside my little shop right at closing time, rain just beginning to fall again, the exact same way it had been raining the night we first met. "I am sorry I doubted you," he told me. "I built my entire life trusting spreadsheets and contracts because people had always let me down before. You never once let me down. I let myself get talked out of what I already knew, deep down, was true." I did not run into his arms right away. I made him stand there in that quiet rain long enough to truly mean it. Then I let him in anyway, because some people really are worth a second rainy night. His mother came to see me herself a few weeks later, without cameras and without an audience of any kind. She admitted she had spent so long protecting the family name that she had forgotten to ask what her own son actually needed to be happy. "I am asking now," she said, "and I am sorry it took me this long to ask it." Jae-yoon did not simply walk away quietly after that. She showed up one last time at a company event, determined to salvage what was left of her reputation by painting herself as the wronged party in this whole story. She stood in front of investors and old family friends and tried to spin the narrative one final time, insisting the evidence against her had been staged entirely by jealous rivals inside the company. Nobody in that room believed a word of it. The paid witness she had used had already given a full statement to the board, and the editor who built the doctored photograph had handed over every single message she had ever sent him. She left that event the very same way she had entered every room in this entire story, chin held high and pride intact, except this time, without a single person following her out the door. Even Myrae, who had spent months quietly furious on my behalf, told me later that watching Jae-yoon's own arrogance finally catch up with her felt better than any apology ever could have. He asked me to come back to Seoul, not to hide away this time, and not to be quietly tolerated, but to stand beside him in full view of everyone who had ever doubted either one of us. One evening, he brought me to Namsan Tower, to the exact hill overlooking the intersection where our whole story had first begun. String lights lit up the entire path ahead of us. "This is where I first saw the person I would spend my whole life choosing," he said, and knelt right there with the entire city glowing behind him. I said yes before he had even finished asking the question, because I had spent years being told I was too much for anyone to want in full, and here was a man asking for exactly that, all of me, with absolutely nothing edited out. We married in a hanok courtyard strung with warm lights, wooden beams above us, and fresh flowers woven through every railing in sight. My gown was an ivory and gold hanbok-inspired dress tailored to fit me exactly as I am, not a smaller version of myself, not an apologized-for version of myself. Simply me. My grandmother sat in the front row in her own soft hanbok, tears in her eyes, the very same eyes that had told me my whole life that worth was never something a scale could ever measure. Myrae stood beside me through the entire ceremony, loud and proud, and crying more than anyone else in that courtyard. Even his mother stood and smiled, a real smile this time, when Tae-min turned to face the crowd and spoke the words that finally closed the loop on everything we had survived together. She did not save my life because of what I could give her in return. She saved it because that is simply who she is, and I intend to spend the rest of my own life being worthy of that. I used to believe my body would always be the first thing people judged me by, and maybe, for some people, it always will be. But I learned something important on a rainy street corner years ago, and again in a hospital hallway, and again on a ballroom floor, and once more under string lights on a hill overlooking an entire glowing city. The people who are truly worth keeping in your life are never the ones counting what you weigh. They are the ones who see exactly what you are willing to carry for someone else and choose to stand beside you anyway. If this story moved you even a little tonight, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss the next one. And before you go, tell me one more time in the comments exactly where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one of them, and I genuinely love knowing how far a story like this can travel.